There's almost as many bears and people in this province. Black bears, grizzly bears. The most dangerous animal in the national parks around Banff is neither a black bear nor a grizzly bear.
What animal is it? Welcome to this special episode of Canadian Dream Podcast. This is, I think, the first time that we're going to talk about the beautiful land of Canada, some tourism destinations, wildlife. If you are from other places across the globe and you're thinking about coming to Canada, or if you just came to Canada and haven't explored so much yet, this episode is perfect for you. This guy here has close to 2 decades of experience working in the tourism industry, and he has done a lot more in his life. He has worked in logging. He has worked as a firefighter. He has been to the military. Matt, are you a secret agent?
You're not the first person to ask me that. I couldn't tell you even if I was.
Please give our audience an idea of all the experience that you have in the tourism industry. What have you done in your life so far?
I am Canadian, yes, but I'm not from British Columbia. I'm from another part of the country. I'm from Nova Scotia on the eastern side of things. So I got tired of having the sunrise over the ocean, so now I like having the sunset over the ocean here on the west coast. And first time I visited was 2006, and I was backpacking across the country. At the time, I was following a girl at that time who lived up in the Yukon in Whitehorse, and I went across the country hitchhiking and train, flights, bus, whatever ways I could to see the country at the time, and ultimately make my way up into the Yukon. And lo and behold, her father owned a tour company, and so when I went up there, I had never worked as a guide before, but he had a float tour company doing trips down the Yukon, the Whitehorse River in that area, talking about the gold rush and the history of it. And I've always been a history buff, so I crossed the country over 2 months, made my way up to the Yukon, and within 4 days, I was leading my first ever tours up there. And it's kind of snowballed ever since.
Where else have you worked?
Started up there and lived there for a little bit. Then I moved back to the East Coast and kind of had the tourism bug biting me for that first little while. It was going into the winter season, and tourism can be seasonal at times depending on which part of Canada you're in. And the following spring, I ended up taking a job with a company and doing tours around the maritime provinces, so Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick. And through that, I ended up getting a connection to companies here on the West Coast, so I could do winter tourism. And for the next couple of years, I did 6 months on the east, 6 months on the west, 6 months on the east, 6 months on the west, living out of a couple of boxes that I mailed back and forth across the country with a backpack on my back. And then in spring of 2009, I ended up deciding that if I could find a job within I had 3 weeks. I gave myself, if I could find a summer job that I liked, I would stay in BC at least for a little while. And it's now 2024 and I'm still out here. So it's been a few years now.
What has been your favorite job in this industry?
There's a lot of facets to guiding. For me, it's been private guiding with small groups of people that know each other. And that's because I get to help them build the trips, and I get to help them live the brochures that they see that's advertised in Canada, because I have been very fortunate to work with people that wanted to go and see Moraine Lake at 5:30 in the morning, or walk on the backside of Lake Louise as the sun is setting. And that's
so very customized to tours.
Yeah, and it takes a while to get to that point. It's very memorable type of guiding. Yeah. There's all kinds of guiding. That's sort of been my favorite part of it.
What challenges does a tour guide go through that people don't appreciate or don't even understand that you're going through?
The seasonality of tourism in Canada is difficult if you're not open to trying new experiences. And what I mean by that is oftentimes in North America as a whole, tourism it's not really a profession. It's sort of seen as a summer job for people to do. And with certain companies, you're doing that. You're having that summer job, and students at university, for example, and then off they go back to school in the fall. Coincidentally, that's the same time that there's a drop in tourism in a lot of places, not just Vancouver, but in other parts of the country as well. And we have to relocate to certain areas, but you can find lots of work in tourism in the wintertime. And for me, that particular journey brought me into BC working as a ski guide with ski tours throughout Alberta and British Columbia.
Oh, I didn't know you do that as well.
There was a time, not so much now, but that was what I worked with the first 2 winters out here.
When is the peak for tourism here in Canada? Is it the summer?
The first 2 weeks of August, the last week of July is usually when people are the most amount of people are traveling at one time within any part of the country.
But you also have some destinations here in Western Canada, at least. You have Alberta, where people like to visit in the winter as well, or in the shoulder seasons.
There is, and that's a really big challenge that the industry is looking at, is how can we find new ways to bring people into new areas, not just Whistler, not just Lake Louise in those busy times, but it's a very big province. There's lots of really neat places to go in the wintertime, and the industry's really working to put more of that out there.
How many times, if you can think about it and try to get to a number, how many times have you been to the Rocky Mountains, for example, or to Victoria?
Victoria and Whistler are very close to Vancouver, so those are trips that I couldn't even count. My first 2 winters out here, part of the work that I was doing when I wasn't ski guiding was working with a company just doing transfers to Whistler. And so I would do 2 trips from Vancouver Vancouver Airport to Whistler every day. And then as I developed more experience and connections, it would be, daily trips to Victoria or 2 or 3 times a week and such. The Rockies, a little less so, and depending on what style of tourism and what kind of guiding I've done, there's been some lulls where I didn't go for 2, 3, 4 years. And then other times where I'm up there for, weeks on end.
But so how many times have you been to the Rockies?
40, 50 times, but we're talking one time might be 10 days at a time, right? So it's a lot of days that have been up there.
I was asking you before, how many times have you seen bears in Canada?
It's funny because being from the East Coast, we have black bears. Mm-hmm. We don't have any grizzly bears on the eastern side of things and in the Maritime provinces. And growing up, I very rarely saw a bear in the region that I was in. And then when I started guiding, I was going through Cape Breton Highlands National Park in the northern end of Nova Scotia. And then we saw bears probably weekly on a regular basis up around places like Skyline Trail and Porto Cove and those areas. And then I moved out to BC. And there's almost as many bears and people in this province. Black bears, grizzly bears, the Kermode bears, which are a special variant of the black bear and such that are here. And, now at this point, it doesn't faze me. I still love watching them. Yeah. They're still a really neat thing to see. But it's now entirely possible with where I live that I walk outside the front door and there's a bear just waiting for me. They're a regular occurrence in that area. And you live with them.
Yeah, so where do you live?
I live in Squamish, which is about an hour from Vancouver. And
on the way to Whistler.
On the way to Whistler. If you ever travel to Whistler, it's about halfway in between. Mm. It's on the Sea to Sky Highway, and it's the point where the highway that travels along the sea portion starts to go up into the mountains. So it's a really interesting spot.
It's a paradise for outdoorsy people like yourself.
It's an interesting place for that because it's in a friendly rivalry, a Canadian fight. It's a friendly rivalry between Squamish and Canmore for the outdoor recreation capital of the country. Both places are big on mountain climbing, on hiking and camping. Each one has its own unique connections, but they're probably the two meccas. If you're an outdoor adventure enthusiast and wanting to experience some really Canadian spots, Canmore and Squamish are the two places to go.
Okay, so let's go back to the bears. I love bears. There was one tour that I went to the Rockies with Discover Canada Tours, where you worked before. Mm-hmm. On that tour alone, I saw 10 bears. Oh man, it's a record for so many people that I know here have never seen 2 or 3 bears in their lives. It's so many, but I'm sure you have seen hundreds. For someone who has never encountered a bear, what are the most common mistakes that people do?
Losing control of the situation is the worst thing that you can do. If you're hiking, if you're walking, they're everywhere in these areas, and they're quite common, more common than most people expect. So they're usually much closer than people expect. And once you get around them, generally speaking, they're just as surprised as you are to encounter you. And if you can keep your calm, and there's a few key signs that you need to look at, and you can, for example, if the bear makes certain noises. If they start grunting, or their ears, for example, kind of pop up or they stay down, it's an indicator of the mood that they're in. If it was a surprise, if they're looking at you, very, very rarely are there anything aggressive that happens with a bear. It does not happen very often.
But you're talking about black bears.
I'm talking about both.
Grizzlies as well?
Yeah, grizzlies.
But I heard grizzlies are way more dangerous.
There's more encounters with black bears, so the chances of something happening in an encounter with a black bear is greater than it is with a grizzly bear. A grizzly bear is bigger claws and bigger teeth, and so they receive some of the negative press. But the most dangerous animal in the national parks around Banff is neither a black bear nor a grizzly bear.
What animal is it?
It's an elk.
Oh, really?
Elk are the most dangerous animals in the park.
Oh, I've seen a few, and I went after it to take.
I try to keep people from doing so. I had a lady on one of my tours. We were at the Banff Springs parking lot, and this can happen anywhere in the national parks because they're allowed to roam free. A question you often get sometimes is, when do they let the animals out in the national parks? And spoiler alert, they don't. Those those elk, those wildlife, or wherever they go, they're allowed to go. It's not there. But she took a picture, and the distance between that elk and her was less than the distance between you and me.
Oh gosh.
She was way too close, and there wasn't a zoom that she was using for that one. And she was okay. Nothing happened, but it's because of that thought that the herbivore, the elk, is less dangerous, that people get closer to them.
So are gorillas. I wouldn't get close to gorillas.
Exactly. And so I've had encounters, in a few instances where I've had to just gently remind people, please step away. And if you take a look around on social media, you'll find at Parks Canada, for example, they had a bull elk charge one of their trucks a couple of years ago. Wow. And there were punctures in the side of the truck from, this is a full-size pickup truck, from the antlers of the elk, because it was defending its
gosh. Did you hear that story? I think it happened in Squamish or around Squamish or Whistler a few years ago. There was a guy who was camping with his girlfriend. She wanted to stay in the van or in the car. He went out and slept inside the tent. Didn't come back in the morning. She went to look for him. A bear had killed him. Don't you know?
One I'm not familiar with.
No? Yeah, it happened.
There are instances that happen, but there's less than 5 a year in North America.
Oh yeah, of course.
But
but that's the closest to Vancouver that I am aware of.
I was doing a tour in Tofino a few years ago, and I had a group of international students that I was taking across, and it was when the salmon hatchery was open near Ucluelet. I was hiking with the group from the parking lot over to the viewing area at the hatchery. And I had warned everybody, what you need to do in case you come across a bear, because when the salmon are spawning, the chances of seeing a bear are quite high.
Yeah.
And I warned them. And as we were walking through, I was in the middle of the group. I wasn't leading and I wasn't trailing. I was in the middle of the group. And I heard a shuffling up ahead around the corner of the trail, and I saw a head poke out. It was a black bear. Poke his head out, and he looked left at the front of the group, and he looked right back towards me. And there was a gentleman named Hunter standing next to me, and bear just was looking, seeing what it was, and Hunter did not realize what was ahead of him, so I gently grabbed him and held him, and I'm like, just stay here. Don't panic. And everyone else was. I did not yell out to the group ahead because they didn't see it, and it was going forward for them, ahead of them, away from it. And I just held Hunter until he realized, and everyone else behind me stopped, and the bear just looked right, and it looked left, and then it walked across and down over the fence and into the gully that was right there, and within a couple of minutes as we watched it, it grabbed a salmon, and then it just walked up to the other side of the river with its salmon, and we didn't see it again. And as long as you just hold your cool and just see what the scenario is, he was just looking for a way to go through. All he wanted to do was go down for dinner.
Yeah. You know what happened to me once? We were traveling with the same company, Discover Canada Tours. We were on the way to the Rockies, and we spent the night in, I think, Blue River, around that area.
Near Valemont.
Lots of bears. And there was a train track there. It was just before the sunset. People went down to the water, took some photos, etc. And then I saw a lot of people coming to me. Oh, did you see the little bear? Did you see the little bear? And they were showing me photos on their phone of the little bears. And I was
cub. Oh no.
And they were so close. Like, how close were you? Oh, it was so close. Where was the mommy bear?
That's
Guys, watch out.
That's always the question in my mind when I see the little ones.
A pup.
And then I don't know where mama is.
Yeah.
You know, the big question is, where's mama? Because all she wants to do is just protect her baby. So that's the most dangerous encounter you're going to have, is going to be a mother bear protecting her cubs. And you really want to exercise caution.
Being an experienced tour guide, you probably went through a few close calls. Any life-threatening experiences?
No, I'm a big guy. Well, there's not a lot that intimidates me in that sense. But even as large as I am, the smallest bear still is twice as big as I am at that time, right? So any of those encounters I try to prevent them in the first place. Just being aware of the situation, and when I'm with a group, just saying, here's what we do in this sort of scenario, and we just be careful.
Canada is really big, right? So many tourists, they come, especially from Europe, thinking, oh, everything is so close by. What do you tell people that helps them prepare for a tour across, say, Western Canada?
There's a lot more nothing than you expect. And by nothing, I don't mean that there's nothing, but it will be the same sort of mountains and trees and rivers and lakes than you've ever expected if you've never been to the wilds of Canada, and not even the wilds, just outside of a lot of the major cities in Western Canada. It doesn't take long before you start to see that it goes on for hours, and it's just massive. And being prepared for how long it can take you to go from point A to point B sometimes, where a lot of folks traveling from Europe, where you jump on a train for a couple of hours and you've passed 3 countries in that time, you won't even get to the next city in some areas.
You won't even find a gas station within those next 2 hours.
If that sign says last fuel for 200 kilometers, and in Canada we do say that, like if it's a long section of uninhabited area, it will say this is the last stop for fuel for the next X number of kilometers. You stop and make sure your tank is filled up there, because it's not saying, no, this company maybe bought this sign to say that's the only one, when it's not. No, it really is. It's a long distance between places depending on where you're going.
When you're traveling, you're driving, usually.
Primarily, I'm a driver guide. It's the style of guide I've preferred being, because I like being in control of the vehicle, and it allows me to adapt the commentary and the conversation I have with my passengers to the surroundings, because what I see, I can help to describe and provide that context for them a little easier, because I'm looking at the same. It's different from being a step-on guide. You don't have the face-to-face connection on the bus as you would normally, but you, as a driver guide, you have a lot more flexibility. So there's more time stopping in areas, side roads, lookouts that you can't really do on the large bus. So there's a lot more time that I would get, maybe not on the bus, chatting with the guests, but actually in front of a vista and a viewpoint that you wouldn't be able to get on some of the larger bus tours.
And are there many hidden gems that people would miss if they were traveling with a major tour company?
Every company has sort of a general outline of where they want to go. And one of the difficulties for some people traveling in the Rockies with a tour company is that there are only certain areas where there are hotels or accommodations. And if you're with a large company with a group, you do have to kind of plan around being where those areas are at. Smaller the tours, the smaller the group, there's more flexibility. But hidden gems, there's lots, and it really depends on which part of Western Canada, for example, that you're traveling to. When I get to design the trips for the guests and work with them, they always want to start off with, Banff, Jasper, Lake Louise, sort of the big three, and I want to be able to take them there too. But one of the nice things about building those is not just doing a one-way loop around the national parks, but going and then coming back on the Icefields Parkway. Same stretch of highway. It's 283 kilometers.
From Banff to Jasper, I mean.
Banff to Jasper, and then you take the Icefields Parkway. A lot of companies just do a one-way loop.
Yeah. Well,
usually Banff to Jasper, and then they're going somewhere else. If I can, and if I can work with my guests to be able to, or if I can provide the suggestions for them, I want you to start in one end, go to the other end, and then go back. Because that same highway looks completely different when you go the opposite direction. That particular section of highway, there's lots of little lakes and hikes that you can do. You really do need multiple days.
Since you mentioned now the ice fields, what is happening to the glaciers there?
It's been eroding. It's been melting and pulling back, for years. When you get the chance to go to the Icefield Center, they have signs along the ground near the parking lots of where this ice was in 1920, 1930, 1940. And you can see how far back it goes until you can see the edge of the glacier. And what you think is the edge of the glacier isn't actually the edge. It's usually covered quite a bit with rock and stone and all that, but it's still further back, and every glacier in British Columbia and Alberta has one.
For somebody who is watching this and never heard of glaciers before, let's say you are in India, have no idea, in Brazil, what the heck is a glacier? What is a glacier?
Basically, it's when in a year more snow falls than melts. So if you have 5 meters of snow this year, and it melts over the summertime, and there's still some snow left at the end of that summer, that snow will get snowed upon the next year. And if there's more snow that comes down every year than melts, what happens is over the course of time, and we're talking hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of years, that snow gets compressed as more weight builds upon it, and that snow becomes ice. And glacial ice is a different kind of ice because it's very dense. It's got that really cool blue color that you get. There's not a lot of air pockets in it, so it's this really compressed snow over the course of a long period of time.
And why do crevasses exist?
Lots of reasons. The biggest is, the ice is a living being in the sense that it's always moving and shifting. And it takes a lot of specialized training courses, experiences with people who've been doing it for, in some cases, their lifetime, to go out on some of these glaciers safely, because as that ice is always shifting, and we're talking millions and millions of kilograms of ice shifting in these points, what may be safe today is not safe tomorrow, because the melting, all of these sorts of things, there's water, there's thousands of liters of water rushing under every glacier whenever it's melting, and that constantly is shifting its base.
If you could put a tour together, let's say for there's 5 of us here, but let's bring my wife too. So for the 6 of us, your dream tour for, say, a 12-day tour, where would you take us and why?
If that was my trip, I'd have you fly into Vancouver. This is my home. This is what I'm used to. I'd show you here. It's a cosmopolitan city. It's a very famous city for lots of reasons. It's a really unique thing to see as a city goes. And how often do you get a city anywhere in the world where you can ski, golf, and sail all in the same day with its proximity to the mountains and the ocean and that? It's unique. Starting here. And then we're going to pop over to Vancouver Island. And I'm going to show you Victoria and the capital area and Saanich Peninsula and those areas, because it's the capital city of the province. It's an older city. It's got a different vibe than Vancouver. We'll pop up to Souk and Port Renfrew and those areas, start to show you some of the large, massive trees and forests that are there. And then my favorite part of Vancouver Island is we're going to go from there up the island and across to the west coast to Ucluelet and Tofino, because it's just a magical spot there. And I can't give anyone that once-in-a-lifetime experience of British Columbia without including, that west coast of the island and that. And then from there, we'll pop back over to the mainland and we'll head up to the interior, Kelowna, the Okanagan region, Kamloops, those areas. It's warmer, it's drier, it's a very different style of geography in that area. You cross, into the Coast Mountains, into the wine country and such. Great food, great drinks, beautiful landscapes, the largest lake in the province. And from there, Revelstoke, which is a little bit further north, and you're starting to get through another one of the multiple mountain passes that are between Vancouver and the Rocky Mountains itself, the Selkirks, the Monachies, beautiful in their own rights. And from there you cross up into Golden, and then you start to see the Rockies. And the Rockies, they straddle the border between British Columbia and Alberta, and the Columbia Valley Plateau. When you first come down and you just see this massive valley that's with 2 giant mountain peaks and ranges of peaks going through. It's just on a scale that you can't comprehend, and it's so cool to see. And from there, you've got your Banff, your Jasper, your Lake Louise. I love taking people down to Waterton National Park, which is often overlooked. It's in the southern part of the Rocky Range. It's right on the border with Montana. So it's kind of Alberta, British Columbia, Montana, that area. Beautiful national park that's there. And then we'll end eventually in Calgary, and then you can fly out from there. So we'll do everything British Columbia, and then we'll leave you leave Alberta.
I know all these places except to the last park you mentioned, but that's a lot of driving.
It is.
Right?
A loop like that is...
How many thousands?
That's going to be close to 4,000 kilometers.
4,000 kilometers. And
that's... British Columbia is a unique place because that's just really the lower central portion of BC that you'd see. If you really wanted to get into the Kootenay Mountain Range, which is in the southeastern section, or up north, Tumbler Ridge, Prince George. One of the hidden gems is a place called Telegraph Creek. It's the home to the Tahltan First Nation. It's basically the end of the road in British Columbia. It's the same province, but it's a 3-day drive from Vancouver to get there. And it's stunning locations that are off the beaten path. That I always try to be able to suggest to people to go to and visit these smaller towns.
Cool. Yukon would be too far for this tour.
In that particular one, it would be.
But it's worth visiting?
100%.
Yeah. Why?
It's everyone knows Alaska. We see that.
Is Yukon just like Alaska?
It's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Fewer people, Still within Canada, so you don't have to deal with any other border issues to travel.
Lots of grizzly bears.
Lots more. And they're bigger, more moose. Wildlife, as you go further north, tends to be larger in size.
I heard the mosquitoes are larger too.
Oh yeah, they're the territorial bird of the Yukon is the mosquito. It will take you away and you'll feed it to its nesties and that sort of thing.
What is the most precious hidden gem that you have encountered that you can think of?
Everyone knows Tofino, and as popular as it is, it's still a hidden gem.
I actually find Tofino a little bit overrated, but I was brought up in Brazil, so lots of beaches in Brazil. But you mentioned the gigantic trees. What specifically do you feel connected to in Tofino?
For me, I always like to be near the water at some point, the ocean at some point. So I've got a really great coastline on the west coast, and while Brazil has its fair share of amazing beaches, and it definitely does them better than pretty much anywhere else in the world in that sense, the fact that we don't have as many big, beautiful, sandy beaches in Canada makes Long Beach at sunset near Incinerator Rock, for example, that much more special for me, because it's just a very peaceful, calm.
And Tofino is also a hub for surfing, isn't it?
It's the cold water surfing capital.
Is it?
It's very popular. They do professional surf for men and women competitions there.
Do you remember the French boat skipper Pipo?
Pipo,
do you remember him?
We did you were doing.
I made a filming about him
on one of the trips that we did together.
Yeah. So, well, for you listening to this episode or watching it, when I first got started in videography, I decided to put this first passion project together. It was a documentary about a boat skipper that I met during one of those tours. Mm-hmm. And it was a French guy with a crazy story. You remember him?
It was hard not to remember people. I don't know whatever happened to him. I was always
He's still there.
Is he? And I haven't come across him on my trips there. But, he lived an interesting life, itinerant, moving with boats, and just, as the tide went, so did he with different things. And
driving his yellow Jeep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but anyways, I remembered people because of the whales. So Tofino has a lot of whales and eagles, bears.
My coolest whale experience, I've had two really cool ones that I've seen lots of whales in Tofino. One was we were on Tonquin Beach. I had a group that had went surfing, and I had a few people that didn't want to go surfing, so we were going to go just kind of explore the coastline. And so we went up to Tonquin Beach, which is kind of a locals beach in town that's really nice. And so we came down the little forest path and down onto the beach, and we were just sitting there for a little bit, and all of a sudden we heard, as we looked around the corner, there was a couple of gray whales that were just off of the shoreline that had started coming up, and they were just surfacing right next to us at the shoreline there at the beach. And gray whales are different from other whales. They're still a filter feeder, a baleen whale, but what they do is, unlike, say, a humpback whale that may go after krill or salmon with a big gulp of the ball of fish, gray whales, they go down to the bottom on the shoreline, they take a big mouthful of dirt and sand, and they expel it, and they eat all the clams and crabs and whatever else that was in there. That's what they eat. So they are constantly chewing
dirt,
the dirt that's there, and expelling it. And so we were watching these two gray whales just by chance on this random beach, just feeding, and they were maybe 20 meters away from us.
Wow. Are the whales dangerous?
No.
Are the killer whales dangerous? Or is it just...
There has never been someone killed by a
killer whale.
A killer whale is what people have called them. Orca is what we call them here in British Columbia. There's never been one killed by an orca in the wild.
Uh-huh.
The only incidents that have ever happened have been in aquariums and such.
On the other hand, sea lions are beasts, are they?
Remember what I said about elk and bears on land?
Yeah.
The difference in water would be very similar. Everyone thinks that the orca is going to be the big one, but No, it's the seals and sea lions that are very territorial, and because they're smaller, people think that they can approach them more, and they're the ones that can move surprisingly fast, even on land, and far faster on water where they're comfortable with, right? So
Yeah. Do you remember that incident in Vancouver a few years ago where, was it a sea lion or a seal
the sea lion in Steveston,
who just grabbed? Yeah.
the little girl, her parents.
Yeah. So tell this story. Here.
Yeah, it was at Steveston Docks, which is a public area. Steveston's a beautiful little part of Richmond, right on the southern tip, almost as far away from Vancouver as you can get. And still be kind of in Vancouver. And the docks are there, and it's popular with people to come and watch sea lions when they're in town. And there's a couple of different species of sea lions that come at different times. This little one, she was feeding the sea lions, which you're not supposed to do. And basically the sea lion was expecting food, wasn't there, grabbed her and pulled her down into the water from the dock as it jumped up. And so they reached down and grabbed her and brought her back up. She was fine. There was no injury, but it was, it's one of the dangers when people are feeding wildlife.
Yeah.
And it's not said for nothing that you shouldn't be feeding the wildlife. Well, they get habituated, and whether it's land-based or water-based, they get used to it. And when they don't get it, they get aggressive.
Yeah. By the way, back to the bears. You see, I have a bear fetish.
Yeah.
Back to the bears. Is it true that whenever a bear attacks a human being, it has to be put down?
They will examine what the scenario was. Generally speaking, if a bear has been involved in a fatality and they're able to identify it, it will usually end up resulting that. And it depends. There's different policies too. You've got national park rangers, you've got conservation officers who are provincial and don't work with that sort of thing. So they'll do an investigation as best as they can, but sometimes they will err on the side of caution. And usually what happens with a bear, if there is an incident and they do make a kill, they tend to stay near to it because it's a food source for them. And whether it's a human being or a moose, they'll be in the area. So it's usually a pretty good assumption that if there is one of the rare
attacks,
fatal attacks, that if there's a bear found, it will be the one that's responsible for it.
Yeah, a few years ago I was hiking. I went all the way to the, oh gosh, Aiden, where did we go? Panorama Ridge.
Ah, yeah.
And we walked past two black bears, super close. Of course, I took my pictures. And then someone had walked by a grizzly bear, and he was super scared. And then I heard that same year, they actually put that bear down. That grizzly was threatening someone else, and then they came in and shot the bear.
And it happens.
So unfortunate.
It happens with black bears too when they get habituated. Usually, especially in an area like Vancouver where we have lots of bears, or with around the city, Whistler, for example, they will do their best to deter the bear from developing any bad habits, going near human food and being near human areas. And you'll usually see a problem bear will have a tag on its ear. Usually, and so it's an indication that it's already been involved in something.
The yellow card
and it's usually a yellow tag, so it's quite literally a yellow card.
You don't see bears walking around with a red tag.
No, that's usually that's when they're gone usually. And the conservation officers and the conservation services, if they need to relocate a bear, they will do so, and they'll helicopter a bear that's on, it'll be hanging from the bottom of the helicopter in a net, sedated, of course. But they'll fly it 100 kilometers into the mountains and give it its own area so that it has the chance to continue without having to be,
What can you do when you're camping? What do you do, for example, when you choose where you're going to sleep or food? Where do you keep your food so that you don't attract the bears, or you don't put yourself in a position where...
Two different areas. If you're front country, which is, the standard campsites that you see for BC parks or the national parks, they will have bear-proof bins usually available that you can, lock things in. Bear may smell it, but it can't access. It's solidly stored. You are not keeping any food in your in your tents at any time, and you're not leaving any food or anything food related on the picnic tables, and that gets loaded into your car, and then off you go. If you're backcountry, you have to be very bear aware. And so usually if you're backcountry, you'll have a dedicated bag or a container where your food is in, that if you're in an area that doesn't have any protective aspects, you will usually hang it from a tall tree in a large overhanging branch. And that means that the bear can't climb up and kind of knock it out. You keep it away from you and your campsite. It's a separate area. I was camping in Jasper National Park a few years ago, 2018, and I was just sitting there in my campsite. I kind of finished what I was doing for the day. I was just relaxing, and there was a very fast-moving Parks Canada truck that stopped right in front of my site, and the warden, she got out, and she had a paintball gun, and they use special paintball guns with instead of paint in the pellets, it's bear spray, and she started firing across the hood of the vehicle, across the road from me, because there was a bear that was approaching the campsites. And so the paintball gun does two things. It's a physical deterrent because it's uncomfortable to be hit by it. But because it has the bear spray in it, which is uncomfortable for them to breathe, it deters them without permanently injuring them, and it sends them away. And that's, in those cases, that's their entire job, is to monitor the wildlife, to make sure that there's a barrier between the two of them without having to fence everything off and block areas and such.
And Parks Canada, they also have a lot of cameras. They're always monitoring.
In area, they can't monitor the whole park, but in areas where they do have facilities, and they're watching things, and herds of animals, for example, in elk herd, for example, there will always be one or two that'll have a tracking collar. Wolf packs in the areas will have a tracking collar on one of them, so that they have an idea where they're at. And if you ever get a chance to look at some of the maps that they have, people would be very surprised at how close these wild animals are coming to downtown Banff or downtown Jasper on a regular basis.
Are there a lot of wolves in Vancouver or around Vancouver?
Not in this area, no. Most of the wolf population is on the interior of the province.
We saw one coming out from Prince George, right, Aidan? Last summer.
Beautiful ones up there. And the big one, and there's actually, name escapes me, there's a Netflix documentary about the sea wolves. And they live along the islands of the coast of British Columbia, and they're beautiful animals.
Beautiful. All right, so let's go a little bit further east now. Ontario, what else we have? Quebec, Nova Scotia. How diverse is Canada, and how different are those parts compared to British Columbia and Alberta?
Well, I was a very naive East Coaster when I came out here, because I thought that the mountains that you see in Vancouver were the Rocky Mountains. Not having any experience with mountain chains on the East Coast. We just don't have them. It's all here in Western Canada.
Or is it more flat in
far
flatter east, really?
Yeah, once you get into, the prairies, there's hills, but everything east of the prairies, generally speaking, it's not even close to what we have in terms of scale and height that's here. So Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, they're small provinces. PEI, they're right on the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful areas, inhabited, from English and French settlers for hundreds of years longer than British Columbia has had. But the history in British Columbia with the Indigenous culture goes back thousands of years more than we have on the East Coast.
Really? I didn't know that.
It's quite a big difference in that sense. But in terms of the colonial history of British Columbia, it's shorter than the East Coast is. One of the events that took place in Nova Scotia was the 400th anniversary of the Acadians settling in Nova Scotia back when I was on the East Coast, and that was a big thing. So you have this, French and English mixture of settlers, a lot of Scottish and Irish as well. Nova Scotia has we've had different immigrant waves over the years. There's a New Germany. For example, in Nova Scotia, there's a German population that's there as well, and Quebec and New Brunswick is a little more francophone, so a lot of the French background that's there. And then Ontario's big. It has a lot of people from a lot of different places. And when you're in Toronto, it's the fourth largest city in Canada and the US. There's millions of people there from, you name it, every country in the world is there. And so it's a really diverse history and background in those areas, and it's really neat to go through.
So what can someone do if they are arriving, say, in Toronto and they want to explore?
Toronto will take up all your time if you want to let it. It's because it's a really neat city. It's kind of like New York North in a lot of ways. In fact, Toronto's original name was York.
Was it?
And so York is a moniker that's used in a lot of neighborhoods, and so there's a lot of connections between those areas. It's not that far from New York and those population areas. But I used to live in Kingston, which was 3 hours outside of out of Toronto, and we go to Toronto and visit. That whole region has neat history. It's right on the Great Lakes, and there's all the Great Lakes that are in those areas. So you've got this kind of not ocean, but marine background for a lot of these towns. Really neat to see coming into all of that and going into a little more of a European feel in those areas than we do out here. A lot of stone, a lot of brickwork, houses and buildings that are 200-300 years old, which is far more than we have out here. Really like Ottawa. It's the capital city. Everyone thinks Toronto is the capital city of Canada, and it's the biggest, but it's Ottawa is the capital of the country, and Toronto is the capital of Ontario as a province.
And is Ottawa worth visiting?
Oh, 100%. What
do you like about Ottawa?
It's a very clean city, and not so much just garbage. It's just it's an orderly city. It's neat to see it. It's on the border with Quebec, so you've got Hull and Gatineau just across the river. So when you're on the Parliament Hill and you've got the seat of Canadian government, which is this big impressive building that's beautiful to see, but you walk around the backside and you've got these rapids and rivers, and you see the buildings and the bridges that connects these two provinces, two languages that are spoken there very fluently back and forth. It's very rare to find somebody that lives there that doesn't speak English and French equally, more than I ever expected, not growing up there. And then when I lived outside of there and spent more time there, I realized just how integrated that language connection was. It's just there's lots of national museums and things to do in that area that are neat to see.
And then we have Quebec.
Quebec is fun. I used to live outside of Montreal.
Do you speak French too?
I used to. It needs a little work. Let's put it that way.
It needs practice, right?
A lot of it.
So what would you say about Montreal? How long, let's say, what could a person do if they had 7 days to explore Quebec?
If I was living in any other city, in Canada and not Vancouver, it would be Montreal. I really like Montreal. It's as orderly as Ottawa can be. It can be just as disorderly, but in a fun way in Montreal. Real good diversity. It's still primarily French, but you don't need to speak French to be able to get around there at all. People will flip back and forth. There's great food, large and a different immigration mix in Montreal than say Toronto, because there's a lot of the French-speaking countries of the world that people come in.
Yeah, I was going to say more Latinos from Latin America and also from Africa.
Yeah, a
lot more.
The French-speaking African countries is quite common there. So you get some really cool places to eat and go out to. Quebec as a province is outside of the city of Montreal in that area. It is very French, and it can be a little more difficult to get around there if you don't speak French or have a translation program to get. But that's never deterred me or any of my friends from going there. It's a beautiful province. It's massive, and I've explored different parts of it, but still only scratched the surface of it.
Interesting. So if you want to cross Canada from Atlantic to Pacific, you have to start in Newfoundland all the way to Victoria. how long will it take someone to drive that distance, and what will you encounter along the way?
Driving 10 hours a day, it's going to be a week just to get from east to west coast. You've got a couple of ferries to take on both ends of it.
Really?
Yeah, in Newfoundland, and then the one into Victoria here on this end. And in that time, you're going to go through the Trans-Canada, and you're going to hit all the major cities in each of the provinces, most of the capital cities for sure. You'll pass within just a few kilometers of the U.S. border on more than one occasion. You're going to have lots of traffic coming through the 401 highway, for example, that section of it near Toronto, very busy area. And then you're going to end up from Toronto to Winnipeg with almost 3 days of driving with just trees and rocks and water and moose. Lots and lots of moose in that area.
Really?
Yeah, it's not uncommon to just be driving through and see another moose every few kilometers down the road in that section, because it's the Canadian Shield. There's very little habitat areas in that section. It's just a big open area. And then once you get to Manitoba, it goes from being the Shield, which is these big kind of rock formations and rolling hills and that, to fields. And it's a couple of days worth of driving straight from Winnipeg across the prairies to Calgary or Edmonton, and it's flat. The road is as straight as it comes going through the prairies. You do have to be careful. It's a unique experience driving through the prairies because the roads are so straight for so long that anytime there's a very small deviation, I'm talking a very basic curve, it's signed for kilometers ahead of that little turn in order to warn people, because you just get into a mode where you're just having to drive like this. And that's all you have to do, because it's a straight. And if you ever look at Google Maps and take a look at the highways, you'll see down the road, it doesn't change. And it's beautiful. The land of golden skies is what you call going through that area, because in the summertime, when you have the wheat fields and that, and the canola and these crops, the agriculture that's there, and just the whole thing moves, but it's moving flatly. It's a very different experience. And then you go from being this flat, chunk of the country, and once you pass Calgary into Banff, the mountains just rise. It's like a wall of a castle or a moat. It's just a wall of rocks that show up all of a sudden from this flatness that you've had for days of driving. And then you are twisting and turning as you go through any of the mountain passes until you'll eventually make your way down to Vancouver here on the west coast, and then a ferry once again over to Vancouver Island to get to Victoria. You can do it. I have a friend in Victoria who did the entire trip, her and her boyfriend, from Halifax to Victoria in 3.5 days.
Oh gosh, no.
They drove about 22 hours every day. When she slept, he drove.
Yeah, no.
When she drove, he slept. It is possible. I do not recommend it at all. No. Take your time to do it, but you will need a week just of driving.
Yeah. Is there a way to drive to one end and then just have your car shipped back? How would you do that if you only want to drive one way?
You can. You can ship it by rail across country.
But it's not common.
It's not common. Most people driving across will drive back again.
Is it possible to travel across the country by train as well?
For the majority of the country, yes. But we have developed cargo rail corridors across the country. We have not really done a good job in Canada at developing passenger rail service.
I know you can go to the Rockies, for example, from Vancouver, and it's not cheap.
You can do it with Rocky Mountaineer, but that's more of a vacation experience on board the train. You can go with Via Rail, and Via Rail will take you to the eastern side of the country, and that takes a few days, and it's a little more... It's not as simple as a bus, but it's not as luxurious.
And it's not as common as in Asia or in Europe.
No, it's one of the questions that ends up happening. Oftentimes people will come to Vancouver and they may say, I want to go to Calgary for the day, Okay, well, here's the directions to the airport. No, I want to drive. I want to come back. It's like, no, like you can't. Or is there a train? There is, but the train you have to do is going to be 12 hours. The scale of it is there. So it's rail is not really a common option. It's beautiful to do. You get to go in, join the train, but it's not something that Canada has done greatly. Now, if you're lumber or cars or television or food, anything that needs to be shipped by cargo, it's great. Canada can ship massive amounts of goods across the country via our rail network for cargo, but for people, not so much.
Matt, I have learned so much. Tell me now, what's next for you?
I work as a tour guide. I work as a consultant with tour companies as well. I'm just about ready to start a new adventure this year, working as for a new tour company. Still waiting on a few little details with that, but it should be exciting.
Who could or should reach out to you and how?
You can find me Instagram at the Tourism Ninja is a great way to reach out there. That's where I have posted different things over the years from my trips.
Do you have a website, or should they?
I don't have my own website at this moment. Instagram is probably the easiest one to find, and I'll find you. You'll find me there pretty quickly.
Okay, we're gonna put the link in the description for this episode, and also we're gonna put your LinkedIn profile in the description as well. Well, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching or listening to this episode. If you are on YouTube, remember to like, share this episode, and also to subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next episode.